Hi. So this is questions 1, 2, and 3 for discussion week 5 that I extended into week 6 to help people find the courage to answer the questions or to work on them. Anyway, the difference between negative 5 squared, I don't have the squared there, and negative 5 in parentheses squared is that you have to think of this one here, negative 5 squared, as the opposite of 5 squared. Because the negative 5 is not in parentheses, technically the order of operations becomes square the 5 and then make it the opposite number. So when you square the 5, you get 25. And I'm going to write this with, it's so weird writing with a mouse. Anyway, so the 5 squared is 25, and it's the opposite of 25, which is negative 25. It's kind of like saying, let's set aside the opposite sign for a minute, or the negative sign, square the number, and then put the negative sign back. That's a crude way of saying it. And, you know, because we math teachers have to be so technical. But anyway, negative 5 in the parentheses then means that you're actually squaring the negative 5, which becomes a positive 25, because a positive number is created from multiplying two negatives. If you multiply two negative 5s, you will get a positive 25. So the interesting thing about squaring any number, if you have any number x squared, whether you start with a negative or a positive number, you're always going to generate a positive answer. So whether you're squaring negative 2 or 2, you'll always end up with 4, providing this is in the parentheses. Okay, so then for problem 2, determine y when x equals negative 2 for y equals 5 minus 6x. Meaning what you're doing here is you're taking this x and simply substituting this number. You're plugging the number in. You're going to remove the x from the equation, y equals 5 minus 6x, and replace the number negative 2. So what that will look like, if I can draw this very well, y will then equal, instead of 5 minus 6x, will equal 5 minus 6 times, and use the parentheses, negative 2. Because what you have here is 6 times negative 2. And one thing to get into the habit of with algebra is if you have 5 minus 6, treat the 6 not as a positive, but include this negative. So you're really doing negative 6 times negative 2, which comes out positive, and you write the plus sign, 12. I know this is odd, but then when you bring down that 5 that has not been included yet, you have 5 plus 12, which will be then 17. This is a funny way to look at it, but it's all your algebraic functions become easier when you get into this habit. You can do 6 times minus 2, which then would result in 5 minus 12. And that's okay as well. Then you remember your integer rules, which are whenever you have subtraction, you make it addition, and you add the opposite. So it becomes 5 plus 12 anyway, which then will equal 17. But there's two ways to think about it. You can begin by including the negative and saying negative 6 times negative 2, which gives you positive 12. Or you could say 5 minus 6 times negative 2, which would give you 5 minus minus 12, which becomes plus 12. Okay, if you're not clear on your integer rules, make sure you watch the video on integer rules, because that's very important. Algebra just gets more and more intense, so knowing the basic rules is very important. Alright, not to scare you to death, because it's not that bad. So solve for x. When negative x plus 2 minus 3x equal negative 60. So what they're saying is you can simplify and rearrange and reduce this equation until you come up with x equals a number. So where we begin is with this. We want to apply our distributive property. So let's take the 8, and I'm going to try have to make this less than 15 minutes. 8 times the x, negative 8 times the x. Then we're going to take the negative 8 times the positive 2, which is negative 8x plus, we're going to have negative 8 times positive 2, which is 16, negative 16. So put minus 16. We'll bring down this 3. It doesn't change, negative 3x or minus 3x. And we still have equal to negative 60. So let's continue to simplify. We're going to add or combine these two like terms. So let's rewrite them. Negative 8x. We'll move this whole thing. Minus 3x. We'll move this thing. Minus 16 because that's still there. And that will still equal negative 60. I'm writing with a mouse, which is really weird. So negative 8x minus 3x, which is technically, and I'll add a different color, is plus negative, meaning you add the opposite. So you have negative 11x. That's this combination. And then you have minus 16, that's still there, equals negative 60. Alright, so we're still working to keep the x on this side of the equal signs or equal sign. We want to isolate the x. So we're going to move this number to the opposite side of the equal sign. How do we do that? You always do the opposite function. If 16 is subtracted, we will add it to both sides. Plus 16, and that'll be plus 16. Alright, so once you add negative 16 and plus 16 will equal 0. So you have that canceling. You still have negative 11x that you haven't done anything to that. It's just sitting there. And now you have negative 60 plus 16. Apply your integer rules. Find the difference, and your answer will be negative because 60 is a large number, larger than 16, and then it carries the negative sign. So your answer will be negative. And what's the difference between 60 minus 16? Well, let's figure it out really quick here. 10 minus 6 is 4, and if we borrowed to make a 5, so that's 44. It's a negative sign, so we have 44. And that's friendly, because x then becomes equal to 4, because in the last step, you divide, because this is multiplied by the x. So you do the opposite. Divide negative 11. And you have to do the same thing on this side that you do on this side, or you have to do it on this side if you did it on that side. So you're dividing by negative 11, which means you divide by a negative and a negative, you're going to end up with a positive. And 4 times 11 is 44, so x will equal a positive 4. This step here is very important. Remember, if you have if you want to separate the 11x from the minus 16, you have to add 16 to both sides. And that moves the 16 out of this side. And now in this situation, you have 11 times x. So you're not adding or subtracting, but you're going to do the opposite of multiplication to take the x, or to take the 11 away from the x and have the x by itself. But if you divide by 11 here, you have to divide by 11 on the other side. This you're going to see over and over again. I will continue to post videos about how to do algebra. And this basic idea of combining like terms and then rearranging equations, understanding how things move from one side of the equal sign to the other, is the bottom line. That has to be understood because everything pivots off of that. Okay, let's stop this before I go over 15 minutes.